What is a creepy fact you wish you never heard? Fatal familial insomnia is a very rare disorder in which you can develop insomnia and it quickly becomes worse and worse until you literally cannot sleep and then you die. Later on in the illness, you enter a permanent state of hypnagogia, which is a state between sleep and wakefulness. It has a 100% death rate. The life expectancy after it develops is 7 months to 6 years. It's passed down genetically and typically is developed when the person is middle aged, so you can watch your parents die from it and then start to develop the symptoms. Kreutzfeld Jacob disease. It's a human version of mad cow where your brain looks like a sponge. It can happen spontaneously. That, and it's damn near impossible to clean the specialized surgical implements used in certain brain surgeries and typically rented, to the point where you can't transfer the prions into the next patient's brain, potentially infecting them with it. It happened in New Hampshire back in 2013. 15 people were exposed from one patient who was confirmed to have the spontaneous form after he died. My grandfather died of CJD around 7 years ago. It was essentially like dementia, but at an absolutely rapid pace. He went from completely normal to forgetful to losing his motor functions to dead in about a month and a half. He was a great dude, and I miss him. It can take up to 3 minutes or longer to die from a broken neck because the connection to the rest of the body is severed, meaning you actually die from a heart attack, stroke, suffocation, basically everything related to depriving essentials like blood and oxygen to the brain. And you're paralyzed from the neck down, meaning all you can do is lay there in deathly pain, knowing you're going to die. You can also smile after getting your head cut off because it takes around 3 seconds for the brain to shut down after decapitation. There's a story about that, but I forgot who it was about. The story I believe he's referring to is actually about a French physician, Dr. Gabriel Barreau. He thought he was communicating with a prisoner after the prisoner's head had actually gotten cut off from decapitation. He was repeating the criminal's name and watching for signs of his head to keep blinking at him in predetermined amounts of time beforehand, and that allowed him to see when the mind actually died. Dead whales eventually explode due to built up gas inside of them, and the force is enough to seriously injure a person standing too close. So if you ever see a dead whale on the beach, get away. Surgery used to be done on babies without anesthesia, as it was believed babies didn't feel pain. This procedure did stop sometime around 1986. Surveys of medical professionals indicate that as recently as 1986, infants as old as 15 months were receiving no anesthesia during surgery at most American hospitals. Rats will crawl all over you while you're asleep. Apparently, they aren't scared of humans while we're asleep. I heard a rat squeak at night at my previous residence and had the brilliant idea of Googling if it was safe in my bed. Kept me awake for several nights until we finally managed to trap it. That still creeps me out. When I was really little, like preschool age, rats had chewed through to my closet and then set up shop in my mattress and had babies in it. It was weeks or months of me telling my mom and dad that I heard stuff moving in my closet and under my bed for them to finally stop calling me a crybaby that needs to learn to sleep in her own room and check it out. And they found all of the pups in there living. I was weirdly relieved to find out it was rats because I thought my toys were coming to life at night and plotting against me. I'd be just so scared every night. Now I wonder how many just crawled all over me every night for however long that lasted. Almost everyone, 85% of the population by age 60, will eventually get eyelash mites. They are terrifying to look at under a microscope, but supposedly harmless. It is estimated that between 2.3% and 5% of all U.S. prisoners are innocent, with the number of incarcerated Americans being approximately 2.4 million. By that estimate, as many as 120,000 people may be incarcerated as a result of wrongful conviction. Also, a lot of people back then used to take photos with dead people as like a last goodbye or memory, But thanks to cameras not being the best, it took about an hour to capture a photo, meaning you would have to pose with a dead loved one for an hour. In the year 2000, one of Russia's largest submarines sank in 800 meters of water, yet still 21 people survived in the submarine for days in an air bubble. Another Russian submarine had tried to lock to the hatch to get them out of there, but every time it failed. Eventually, a chunk of phosphorus or another element which explodes on contact with water was knocked over by a crew member and exploded. The remaining 21 people either burned to death or suffocated. R504 Kolyma Highway, also known as the Road of Bones. During the 1930s to 50s in the Soviet Union, hundreds of thousands of gulag laborers died constructing it. With limited resources, surviving inmates used the bones of those who perished to build the road, which stretches for over 2,000 kilometers. Today, it is treated as a memorial. Rhubarb leaves. Deadly as hell if ingested, you drop dead in under 15 minutes. It's traceless as well, and its taste can easily blend into salads. It grows easily and everywhere, and now I'm paranoid. Telling my other half this fun fact was not that bright of me. P.S. We have rhubarb growing in our backyard. I count the leaves every morning. Every goddamn morning. Vigilance, gentlemen! Vigilance! A parasite called Toxoplasma gondii exists in cat excrement, presumed to be from the brains of rats. By some estimate, around 2/3 of human populations in developed countries are infected by the parasite, which again, theoretically, has minor personality-altering effects. Cotard's delusion, also known as walking corpse syndrome, is the belief that you are dead, that your organs are missing, and or that you are decaying from the inside out. People with this delusion often starve themselves or hurt themselves with impulsivity, risky acts due to the belief that since they are already dead, they cannot starve or be killed. Cotards can be developed after a brain injury. In one case study, a man called Will had significant trauma to his brain, especially the frontal lobe, cerebral cortex, and ventricular system. He believed that he had died of AIDS and gone to hell. Another case was of a younger woman who believed that she was dead and or ceased to exist in the first place. During the 3 years she battled the delusion, she started watching Disney movies, and the movies made her feel something inside, something she knew a dead person could not. So little by little, Disney movies brought her back to life, so to speak. She has since recovered from the ordeal, claiming she's not dead anymore. I'm shocked Disney doesn't market that story in some form or fashion. In 1973, 2 men were in a small submarine 1,575 feet deep in the ocean. Suddenly, there was a malfunction, and water began flooding in, causing the sub to sink. They only had enough oxygen left to survive for 3 days. It took so long for the rescue team to find them that by the time they extracted the crew, the men only had about 12 minutes of oxygen left. Russian scientists, maybe others too, were able to bring a dead dog's head and organs back to life. The head was responsive to noise and movements. A Russian surgeon whose work was super important for organ transplant severed a dog's head and surgically attached it to another dog to make a 2-headed dog that lived for a week after. Also, they did an entire head transplant of a monkey head onto another monkey body, and same deal. It lived for several days after. It's crazy, but I guess it's important even if it seems like some mad scientist stuff. Polar bears are often regarded as one of the only, if not the only, animals that actively hunt humans. No, that doesn't just mean if you get close to one, watch your backs. That means even if you get away from them, they will try to smell your tracks and hunt you. This can reportedly go on for miles. Oh, and it doesn't help that they're the largest bears in the world at 11 feet tall on their hind legs. And they weigh about 1,700 pounds on average, and not to mention, they can run fast and rip you to shreds. Your body begins breaking down almost immediately after death, right? And this is thanks to the billions of bacteria inside you, mostly in your gut, that break down, eventually turn the fatty tissues into waxy soap in a process known as saponification. Its technical name is adipose, It is also known as grave wax and corpse wax. 1/3 of every Swedish citizen will die in their house and only get discovered by neighbors calling about the smell. Since many of us live alone in apartments, there is no one to see if you're alive or not. It's the most depressing thing I know. Natalie Wood's mother was told by a gypsy to beware dark water. She passed that fear of water on to Natalie, who feared for the rest of her life that she would drown. Natalie Wood indeed did drown just after Thanksgiving in 1981 after going missing from the yacht she was on around midnight. Maybe not so creepy, it's just weird to consider. The last person to be executed in France by guillotine was Hamida Jandobi on September 10th, 1977. That's just way too recent. There's a theory out there that something is essentially eating our universe, like a massive, moving, forever expanding black hole. It's essentially devouring everything, and it moves and acts so quickly that if it reached and killed us, we wouldn't see it coming or feel it. It would just be a normal life one moment, and then suddenly everyone and everything on Earth no longer exists. I've heard a few. The Earth can end at any moment. Gamma rays, directional sunburst, asteroid we didn't detect, supernova exploding too close in the galaxy. Some people kill for fun, or out of annoyance, and see it as no big deal. You just hope not to meet them when they are in that mood. Peasants in the Middle Ages had about 157 more vacation days in a year than the average American worker, who gets around 8. Not saying I would trade places with them, but boy, did work ethics change to benefit the employers for some reason. And sometimes people just die too young, without achieving anything at all in life. The legends of vampires often originated due to natural processes in body decomposition. As the body loses fluid, the skin retracts and hair and fingernails appear longer. Blood is sometimes seen in the mouth as well. Once you become symptomatic with rabies, the mortality rate is 100%, and there's nothing anyone can do to save you. Mind you, a tiny bite or even a scratch from a bat can infect you while you're sleeping, so you wouldn't notice it, and therefore wouldn't get vaccinated to prevent it spreading to your brain. Some large animals that are predominantly thought to be herbivores, like deers or cow, are actually omnivores. Deer can be seen eating off of carcasses in the wild, and cows will regularly eat smaller animals like baby chicks, sometimes alive. Also, deer velvet shedding is nightmare fuel. There is something called blue baby syndrome. It's a syndrome in which the baby has some form of problem with oxygen getting through the lungs, I believe. This causes the child to appear to have their skin tinted blue at the lips, toes, and fingers. I'm sure there's something on it on Wikipedia. Teaching hospitals used to, and some still do, basically allow their students to practice invasive examinations on unconscious patients who are prepped for other procedures without their knowledge. They legally get around this by having them sign documents that are vague about it. It is kind of a dirty little secret. They justify it by saying that it is hard to get volunteers for students to practice on. Imagine going in to get an operation and having signed numerous documents that usually no one reads, being put under, then having 10 students do invasive internal examinations on you without your knowledge. In my opinion, that is pretty fucked up. That people who are guillotined or those who are decapitated live for about 2 to 15 minutes, dependent upon their will to live and ability to cling to life after the action of decapitation takes place. This was found out after a doctor had been petitioning the French government to examine the bodies, and mostly the head's reactions, to sudden and rapid detachment from its body. Oftentimes, they'd try and vocalize, which showed remarkable ability to recognize their names and surroundings, and would show an outstanding array of facial features uncommon to other forms of just recently departed people. These findings helped stop the usage of the guillotine in France as part of its different death penalty rulings allowed. It's a fascinating read, a tad macabre, but isn't all medical and to a lesser degree science-related discoveries involve the macabre to a minor or lesser degree? I know I'm late, but believe it or not, the first person to translate the Bible into English was burned at the stake as a heretic. The plague was also set off as a butterfly effect that would lead to Poland being the country worst affected by the Holocaust, and the Battle of Teutoburg Forest set off a butterfly effect that would lead to the Nazis. There is a kind of wasp, the Pepsis grossa. The females paralyze a tarantula and lay eggs on it. The larvae that hatch eat the spider alive. They first suck out the body fluids and then proceed to dig into the body of the spider. The vital organs are spared at first to leave the spider alive as long as possible. A couple of days before Abraham Lincoln was killed, he told friends about a dream he had. He said the dream was of him standing beside a coffin with soldiers and people weeping outside of the White House. He asked who had died in the White House to a random person, and the person said, the president. Zombie viruses do actually exist, just not in the traditional sense. The two examples I can think of off the top of my head, one infects ants, causes them to turn into a fungus growth that attracts other ants to the forming mass and consumes them, and the other is one that affects mice and rats. It essentially takes complete control over rodent's body, forcing it to find the nearest cat. The cat subsequently kills the rodent and consumes it. The virus then kills the cat. I'm kind of sparse on the details, but there are more. You can just Google it. Then there's the Nazi super soldier experiments that cause real human zombies. They didn't eat people or anything, but the serum that they were working with did cause subjects to be, in every sense of the word, zombies. But some were conscious for a few minutes and able to answer questions before actually dying. This is Googleable as well. One of the tragedies of Pearl Harbor, the attack that sent America headfirst into Japan during World War II, was a group of men who didn't die immediately. 3 men were trapped several feet underwater in a sunken ship. They were aged 18, 20, and 21. They were locked into a small room with no hope for escape. If they could somehow cut their way out into the water, they are still going to drown before they would break free and swim to shore. What's sad is it took people on land 2 days to realize that there were people stuck in the ship. However, they knew they were unable to help them, and no one came to rescue them. Their only choice was to sit there and wait they did. When time came around to lifting the ship out of the water to search for bodies, they found the 3 young men and a calendar. Yep, the men had kept track of how many days they survived, not knowing if help, death, or a world war was around the corner. Imagine having to cope with your death, knowing it's the end, feeling the worst emotions possible for an hour. Now picture a day. How about a week? Well, these men did it for 16 days of starvation and darkness, trapped in the steel belly of a dead whale. The military tried to keep it a secret from their family members, only for some to find out their brothers and sons had really died. I saw a news story of a woman with a rare type of epilepsy that causes her to see everything like a slideshow or a video game that gets 10 FPS. She described watching cars drive by and saying they freeze in place for a moment and then snap into position further down the road over and over. Her entire life is played out in front of her eyes in still frames, and because of that, she wears blinders or earmuffs because her senses are constantly contradicting one another, and it overwhelms her. I can't imagine how horrifying it would be to experience life like she does. Indian followers of the Zoroastrianism don't bury or burn their dead. Instead, they leave the bodies in special towers, exposed to the elements to be eaten by vultures. Unfortunately, the vultures are now endangered, leaving the bodies to slowly rot. There was a man from France named Teilhard, 1772 to 1798, who couldn't stop eating. By the time he was 17, his parents had kicked him out. He was eating his own body weight in food daily at the time. When he enlisted in the army's rations couldn't satisfy him. Often, he would sneak out at night and search for offal in the garbage in the gutters. He was hospitalized, doctors trying to find a cure. But at night, he would raid the morgue. Scientists, unable to stop his ability to eat almost anything, began to study it. They'd feed him such random things as eels, which he'd swallow whole, lizards, a kitten, and puppies, all of which he ate alive. When a 14-month-old baby disappeared, he was chased from the hospital by an angry mob. He later died of tuberculosis. The island of Okunoshima in the inland sea of Japan is known for two reputable things. One, it's named Rabbit Island because of its overabundance of wild rabbits, and two, the island has World War II ruins of a chemical weapons factory, creating poisons like mustard gas in its attacks on China. So vital was its secrecy to the Japanese government that they tried to wipe its location off the maps. Somewhat recently, 2012, scientists discovered over 1,400 new species of bacteria living in the belly button. Everyone's belly button ecology is unique. Add it to the fingerprints or snowflakes list. In that same study, one volunteer's belly button harbored bacteria strands that had only ever been found in soil from Japan, where this man has never been. While most parents do what they can to prevent or stop their babies from crying, that's not always the case in Japan. That's because it's a 400-year-old Japanese tradition that if a sumo wrestler can make your baby cry, it means he or she will live a healthy life. During a special ceremony, parents hand over their infants to sumo wrestlers who bounce their precious tots up and down and sometimes even roar in their little faces to get the tears flowing. He's not a baby that cries much, but today he cried a lot for us, and we are very happy about it, said one mother at a 2014 event.